I have been creating online performances for more than 2 decades now, and until last year, this was quite a niche area. Even as recently as 2019, if I was telling people what I do, the most common response was for people to say, wow, I never heard of that before, or something like this. Of course, the pandemic has changed all of that, and now not only has everyone heard about it, but everybody is doing it, which is very exciting and really interesting to see what people are doing. But it's also, from my side, a little bit overwhelming because I'm used to have been doing this quietly in a corner, and now it's like suddenly the world has rushed in to join in. And it's also been a little bit frustrating for me because there are so many people saying they're um, inventing new ways of doing theatre and pioneering things and doing things for the first time. And it makes me feel a bit sad because there is this long, rich history of cyberformance that goes back well before when I started, basically back to the beginning of the internet, because artists are always looking for and experimenting with new technologies and new possibilities. So one of my personal passions at the moment is to try and help to keep visible some of that long history that is there. So today we're going to do some time travel back to my own entry into this field. And we have to go back to the end of the last century. It sounds like such a long time ago to say that, but indeed it was the last century. Um, and this was a time when the internet didn't dominate our lives in the way that it does now. Um, and hardly anybody had a mobile phone. And if they did have one, they couldn't use it to surf the internet. And they certainly couldn't stick it in their pocket. It was too big. um, so the online environment was very different in those ways. But in fact, I think when I look at it, it hasn't actually changed that much. Most of the technologies that we're working with today were around in the early or mid 90s. Artists have been experimenting with streaming, with IRC, moves, gaming environments, graphical chat rooms, virtual worlds. All of these were available in the 90s in similar forms to how they are today. The main difference that has changed is us and how we respond to and use these technologies in our lives. So in the mid-90s, I was writing and directing and producing stage plays in New Zealand, and it wasn't possible to live off this. So I was also working in the fledgling internet industry of the time. And so I was exposed to the internet relatively early on and started to see that artists were using the internet for more than just promotion and documentation of their work. And it was in 1999 when I stumbled across a group called Desktop Theatre, who were creating live performances in a graphical chat room called the Palace. And I started working with them. And there's a lot of archive material on their website if you want to have a look. And there's some screen grabs which show you the Palace. It was a two-dimensional graphic sonic chat room. So we had text to speech, computer voices. Everybody had their own little avatar that you could make your own. You could draw, you could do various different things in this two-dimensional environment. And Adrian Yannick, who was one of the desktop theatre players, described chat rooms as an anticipatory space ripe for dramatic play. And she talked about avatars as being a kind of digital puppetry, and that performing from a computer was like being behind the mask of the screen. So she really was connecting with theatrical metaphors in her use of digital technology. And it was also a lot like street theatre too. Sometimes we were going into public chat rooms. You can see the image in the top left there. We would take a semi-improvised performance into a space where people were just meeting to chat and do it rather like turning up in the street and spontaneously performing. So I was doing this kind of work with desktop theatre and telling people about it who were mainly theatre people. And I was finding that I was really struggling to explain it to theatre people. Many artists who were working in this field at the time were actually coming from a visual arts background. There were not nearly so many theatre people involved. And I realised that we have very different languages, the way that theatre people talk about things and visual artists. Often we can be talking about the same thing but using different words. And this vocabulary from the visual arts didn't sit right with me because I was used to theatre terms. So there were a lot of different terms floating around 20 years ago, and there are even more terms now. Everybody who started doing it for themselves has come up with their own term to describe what they are doing. So, online performance is one that's used a lot. And I find this term a bit difficult because it doesn't say a lot. It doesn't have a lot of colour or descriptiveness about what we're actually doing. And of course, if you search on the internet for online performance, you'll get a whole lot of results about technical performance and things rather than actually what you're looking for if you're looking for theatrical performance. And another term that's used quite a lot is virtual theatre. And for me, this also wasn't quite right, although I really get the connection to Artaud's reality virtuelle and this kind of virtual reality. But by the turn of the century, the term virtual reality was already becoming what we think of today as VR, which is more sci-fi and hypertech. And this isn't really what I was doing. What I do still is actually quite low tech. And virtual also implies that there's a binary opposition between real and virtual, and that what we're doing in the virtual world is actually not quite real somehow. And for me, I felt what I was doing was very real, so I didn't want to call it virtual. So I was floundering around trying to describe what I was doing and failing to find words that really made sense to me. And so I made up a word, and the word that I made up was cyberformance, putting together the two words cyberspace and performance, because it's performance that happens in cyberspace. So, and it also has connotations of cybernetics, which is to do with the human-machine relation and interaction, and also cyberfeminism, which is another one of my interests. And of course, if you search for cyberformance on the internet, you'll come up with some more interesting results than if you do a search for online performance. So what is cyberformance? It's performance that uses the internet or uses internet technology to bring remote performers together in real time for live theatrical performance. The internet is the site for the performance. So this is really important. It's a performance that is happening using the internet. It's not a broadcast of a performance that was made for the stage. The audience can be online or in a space with one or more of the performers, or both. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And if you want to find out more about Cyberformance, you can read my thesis, which Jaffa was referring to before, and also Wikipedia and cyberformance.org, which I have to say is normally a bit embarrassingly out of date. But there's plenty of resources out there where you can find out more about it. So continuing on our time traveling journey, we're moving now to 2001. So pretty much exactly 20 years ago in January 2001, I, for the first time, gave a cyberformance demonstration in a theatre space. And this was at Oden Teatret in Denmark at a theatre festival. And I worked with Adrian Yannick and Lisa Brenet from Desktop Theatre to make a presentation as part of another project that I was working on with Jill Greenhalgh as part of the festival. And I was sitting on the stage, you can see me there in that photo, and manipulating in the palace, which you can see the screen grab of, and the audience in the theatre were watching what we were doing. And afterwards, this huge eruption of argument happened that really kind of surprised me, that there were people in the audience who were very angry that I was calling this theatre, even though I was actually calling it Cyberformance. And then there were other people who were really interested and were saying that I could call it whatever I wanted. So it was, I didn't expect that, which is perhaps silly of me not to have thought that these physical theatre people would be kind of outraged at what I was suggesting. But it challenged me to go on with this research and to think about whether what I was doing actually is theatre or is it something else. And this did later lead into my thesis. But before the thesis, I initiated a research experiment that was called the ABC experiment, with ABC standing for Avatar Body Collision. And this happened over 2001 and 2, and I got together a group of people from around the world who were interested in exploring these questions of how is technology changing our definitions of theatre, and what place does cyberformance have within theatre. So these questions are actually pretty much the same questions that I'm hearing people talking about now. It's a different context because we have so many more people familiar with the internet and so many more possibilities like Zoom and Skype and all of these things that just didn't exist 20 years ago. But a lot of the technologies, as I said, are very similar. So having worked purely online with the Palace and desktop theatre and online audiences, I became interested in experimenting with the combination of the proximal stage, where people are together in the same space, and the online stage. And this was what we were exploring in the ABC experiment. And I'd unconsciously done this in the previous presentation at the Odin. I was sitting on the stage, but in my head, I was just feeling like I was a technician, sort of, facilitating the performance, not really a performer myself, or at least not with my body. But people said to me afterwards that they were fascinated by watching me sitting at my computer, and they were waiting to see what effect my typing had on what was happening on the screen. And I had thought looking at somebody working on a computer is actually pretty boring. But I learned that it can be suspenseful and interesting, which was another surprise. So in the ABC experiment, we had performers in a theatre in Wellington, in New Zealand, and a projection of the Palace on a screen with performers from around the world. The audience were with some of us in the theatre space, and we were also using an audiovisual conferencing application called iVisit to give the remote performers a look into the theatre space and at what everything was happening there. But this performance was not actually accessible to online audiences, although we did get a few random people who came into the Palace room, not realising they were coming into a performance. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos from the theatre performance of the ABC experiment. We were just crazy busy making everything happen. Of course, you didn't have internet in the theatres in those days, and one of the things we had to do was get a really enormously long cable to run it from the theatre office back through into the theatre space. And this took up quite a lot of our time, just getting internet into the theatre. So after this, from the ABC experiment, 4 of us continued on as Avatar Body Collision. I'm just checking the time because I don't want to take too long. There was myself and Vicky Smith, also in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Lena Saarinen in Finland, and Carla Patacek in England. And there's the web address there as well, so you can have a look for more information online. From 2002 to 2007, we created 10 performances, and we were initially working with the Palace, the graphical chat room, in combination with iVisit. And some of our first performances were with a performer in a proximal space with the audience. and bringing the rest of us in online using these applications. So this was from Screen Save Her in 2002, where Carla was on stage in the theatre, and we used the Palace as well, but in these particular images that I have here, we're using iVisit, which was a webcam application where you could arrange the webcams in the order that you wanted. And we had various different things there. You can't quite see, but we were passing pieces of paper between our webcams, and then I was eating the paper and Carla produced it out of her mouth in the theatre space. So we were playing with this idea of having one space across the internet. This shot shows you the Palace and iVisit together in what we called screenography, which was the scenography of the screen. So we had the Palace there in the middle where some avatars were performing a scene, and the iVisit windows in different arrangements around it or over the top of it. And this was from my laptop in the theatre space, and you can see me there on the bottom left. I'm actually on the stage interacting with the performance that is happening on the screen. And I should also say that all of this was possible to do over dial-up internet. At this time, Vicky was living in a rural area in New Zealand, and she had no broadband. And we were all just using our own computers, domestic internet connections. We had no funding. We had no fancy technology. This was all just done in a very do-it-yourself, low-tech kind of way. And I won't talk too much about our work because it is all documented on the website, and you're all very welcome to go and have a look at what we did. The audience were often asking us how they could see our performances online, and we did do some that were just in the Palace for online audiences, like this one here, Dress the Nation. The performers are the 4 politicians, and then the audience are the other avatars that are mostly there in the lower left-hand corner. But the audience did have to download and install the Palace. They had to understand how to enter it and how to find our room and some basic operations of their avatar. So it did provide quite a lot of barriers to people participating in these performances. So we started to fantasize about having our own platform where we could combine the features of the Palace and iVisit that we really liked, do away with the features we didn't want, and make it really easy for the audience to come to our performances. And in 2003, we got a small grant from the New Zealand Arts Council to develop Upstage, which is a web-based venue for Cyberformance. There's no download, it's just click on a link, no login for the audience. It's led by artists, and it's purpose-built for Cyberformance. From 2007 to 2012, we had annual online festivals of Cyberformance in Upstage, involving hundreds of artists from all over the world. And there have been many other performances and workshops and projects and things over the years. And I won't actually, I was going to go to the website to show you a bit, but it's all there on upstage.org.nz if you want to go and have a look. I haven't actually put the URL there, but upstage.org.nz is where you can find all of the documentation. And actually, I think on another slide coming up, I have got the URL. So I will move on quite quickly to talking about the intermediate audience, which is another concept that I came to when I was writing my thesis in 2007. There's 2 theatre researchers, Chappell and Cattenbelt, had just published their book on intermediality in theatre and performance. And they had this concept of intermedial performance. They describe intermediality as a meeting point in between the performers, the observers, and the confluence of media involved in a performance at a particular moment in time. a space where the boundaries soften. So I thought, well, if we can have a performance that's intermedial, then we also have an intermedial audience. When audiences are watching Cyberformance, particularly when they're online, but also if it's an online offline piece, they're in a different position to the traditional theatre audience that's sitting quietly in the dark as a passive observer. So we need to learn and discover new codes of behaviour, and we need to do that as artists together with the audience. And the online audience have a unique proximal context. We don't know where they are necessarily. They could be anywhere in the world at any time of day or night, any season of the year. They're speaking all kinds of different languages, and they may be in a situation where the phone is ringing, or children are coming in to interrupt them, or they're sitting on a train watching the performance. So they have very different contexts that may help or hinder their appreciation of the performance. So they're mediated. If they're online, they're absolutely mediated. They're experiencing and interacting with the performance through the technology. If they're a proximal audience, they're also seeing the parts of the performance, at least through the mediation of the screen, and they may also have other ways that they can be interacting, especially now with texting or using social media as part of the performance. All of this is conspiring to mediate the audience as well as the performance. And there are many ways now that they can interact and participate. So I just have two examples that I will show to illustrate this idea of the intermediate audience, as well as performances that are participatory in that we're starting to explore how we can have networked conversations using Cyberformance as a way to set up that context for a really networked conversation. So the first one is Makeshift, which was a collaboration between myself and Paula Crutchlow in 2010 to 12. And here we're using a combination of upstage and live streams. So we didn't manage to implement live streams in upstage until 2013. Before that, we had something called Motion JPEG, which allowed us to put in a series of still images that approximated a live stream, but it wasn't actually a live stream. So for Makeshift, we developed a sort of hybrid interface with upstage and webcams, so people could watch it in the browser. And this was a performance that took place between two houses, two domestic houses, where Paula and I were each in a living room. And in this particular one, Paula is in a house in the UK and I'm in a house in India, which is the house in the picture there. And we had a small audience in each house with us who were helping us to create the performance, as well as an online audience who were interacting through the chat. And the audience in the house were also appearing in the webcams, as you can see in this next one. And all the audience were quite actively involved in the performance. And then there was quite a lot of discussion after the performance about the theme, which was to do with disposability and plastic and the environment, and these kind of issues of consumption and disposability. And the next performance is We Have a Situation, which is an ongoing performance series since 2013. And at this point, we had streaming and upstage. So this image is just upstage, but there are two webcam streams that you can see there, as well as a photograph in the background. This performance was discussing e-waste. And the concept is that I'm invited into a community to develop a Cyberformance on a particular theme. And actually in this one on e-waste, Christina was also involved in this performance as one of the performers and creators. So I would do a workshop for about a week with a local group of artists and community people on a theme that they had chosen. And then we present the Cyberformance as a provocation to a network discussion. And this screen grab is actually from the discussion afterwards. So the people in London and the other webcam there is from Graz in Austria, as well as the audience online, are discussing the topic of e-waste in the context of the performance that we've just presented. So in these works, I'm exploring how I can use Cyberformance as a way to provide a context for a really interesting and really global networked conversation. And both of these ones, I really encourage you to have a look at the websites for more documentation, because there is a lot there about them. And these last two are much better documented than some of my earlier work. So now we'll fast forward to 2001, and suddenly we have new platforms all over the place. Many of them are very similar to things that were around 20 years ago. I mean, I look at things like VR chat, and I think, oh yes, there was one called Active Worlds back in the 90s that was this kind of 3D environment. Or Habbo Hotel was in the 90s, very similar to Mozilla Hubs and these kind of spaces that we have now. So, and also a lot of these platforms today have either got a social focus or an education / meeting business kind of focus. The ones that are arts orientated are often quite focused around streaming, although not all of them. But what I really think has changed is not so much the technology, but the difference is us, and the openness of audiences, and also the openness of theatre people. This has really changed since my experience in 2001 of really upsetting people at a theatre festival by suggesting that bodies on a screen or avatars on a screen could be theatre. Nowadays, theatre people are much more open to that, and audiences are much more used to this idea of having real-time online events. So whereas upstage, now that we have gone into this new post-pandemic phase of online performance, to quickly recap, Upstage is an online venue for live performance with the emphasis on liveness, and there is the URL if you didn't catch it before. It's browser-based, there's nothing to install, unlike plenty of other platforms, and it works across mobile devices and computers of all varieties. It allows artists to do collaborative real-time manipulation of basically any digital media that you can have on the web. So audiovisual streams, images, animations, pre-recorded sound and video, text to speech, live drawing. If you can put it on Facebook, or if you can put it on your website, then you could use it in Upstage. The audience can interact through a text chat and other features we've got coming out now, like using emoticons as ways to clap or give other reactions, and we're developing other new features because we are in the middle of a complete rebuild of the software, and that is going to be launched in September this year. It's a Creative Europe funded project called Mobilize Demobilize that is exploring what mobility and immobility means in our contemporary world. And we actually put this funding application in 2019 before the pandemic, and it was eerily kind of ahead of its time, because when I look at the concept now, I can imagine that we would have written it during the lockdown, but we did write it before the lockdown, and then it just became hugely relevant. So we have artists working in Austria and Sweden and other places around Europe and around the world to create a performance series that will be used to launch the new platform in September, October of this year. And there'll be information about that on the Upstage website and also on the website for the project, which is mobilize-demobilize.eu, that you can see there at the bottom of the screen. And following the launch, the new platform will be available for artists to use, and you'll be able to get a login and come to online workshops to find out how to use it for your own performances. So to conclude, I just want to briefly mention two other projects that aim to remember and make visible some of the huge history of Cyberformance. I'm certainly not the only person that has been doing this, as you know, and it goes back a long time. So the first project I would like to mention is one that Christina also was part of, and this is the Symposium, which a group of us organised in 2012 as a one-day symposium on Cyberformance. And I've just listed the artists down there who presented. One of them was Maria X, whose presentation we were seeing here at this festival yesterday. And we were using the Water Wheel Tap, which was a bespoke Cyberformance platform that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. One presentation was given in Upstage, but that people were presenting about work that had been created in all kinds of platforms, including Second Life, gaming environments, purpose-built environments. And all of those presentations are recorded and on the website. And after the Symposium, Annie Abrahams and I edited Symposium, the book, which brought together a whole lot of different materials from this event, as well as some reviews from afterwards, chat logs, all kinds of different material. And we were actually looking at this book again just the other day, Annie and I, and thinking how incredibly relevant it still is today. We published it in 2014, so it's 7 years old, but if you're interested in this area, I really recommend that you have a look at it. The PDF and the ebook are free. You can get to them from the Symposium website, and you can buy the hard copy book on Lulu. It's a print on demand. And it's a really nice book. I really recommend it. And the other project I want to mention is a video that Annie Abrahams and Suzanne Fuchs and I have recently made, which is called Before the First. And we did this, started it late last year and finished it on the 1st of February this year. We were just, finding that a lot of people were saying, oh, it's the first online this and the first online that. And we thought, well, no, it's not. And we asked a few people, when was your first online performance, and put it together in a little video. It's only 6 minutes long. I won't show it now because I think it's more interesting that we can talk and discuss, but it's there on Vimeo and it's being shared around social media. So maybe you've already come across it. And it just gives a little tiny glimpse into the huge variety of the work that was done over the last 30 years. We got back as far as 1992, but of course, people have been coming to us since saying, yes, but I was doing things in 91 and 1990. And it really goes back before you can really believe that it would. So I really encourage you all to explore some of this history, and there's a lot of information out there if you start looking. And we could talk about it for hours, but I will not carry on. I'll hand it over to Christina now and really welcome your questions afterwards so that we can discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. Thank you. It was a very great talk and I learned a lot. And, I really appreciate the broad range of project that you have done before. And yeah, I have some questions that maybe I can answer after Christina's talk. And thank you, Christina, again for joining us, and we can start.
Thank you, Jafar, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the festival. My talk will reflect on, actually, let me start my slideshow. That might take some time, sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, I guess you can see my slides now.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So my talk will reflect on my cyberformance practice as research journey, focusing on adapting and translating theater from stage to cyberstage. When I started researching online theater, I thought, oh, that's new. Let's call it a term. Let's call it e-theater. But when I actually started reading about it, and I found all those different terms that Helen mentioned, I thought, no, I'm not going to add another term on this long list. And I decided to use cyberformance. It felt like the right term to use. Helen, for all those reasons she mentioned, it was really well defined. And I thought that's the right term for me to use. And instead, I used e-theater as the title of my project, rather than as a term to define online theater. So 10 years ago, I directed my first cyberformance as part of my research on political cyberformance, the e-theater project. The e-theater project comprised a series of 3 experimental cyberformances: Siberian Chunk Circle in 2011, Merry Crisis and a Happy New Year in 2012, and the e-theater project and collaborators in 2014. I didn't do things like Helen, so I used a completely different approach. So with the first performance, I was at the same space with the performer. We had no on-site audiences at all, and we only did the performance for online audiences. And I continued through that project, which finished in 2014, with only online audiences, no proximal audiences at all. And in the beginning, performers were in the same space. They weren't in different spaces. And they would perform for the online audience via the internet. I then also experimented with having performers in different places. And for each of these 3 performances, I used a different methodology, a different focus. I use cyber adaptation, where audience readapt the adapted piece through real-time interaction. Cyber ethnotheater. Ethnotheater is another word for verbatim theater. And it was about performing participants' responses that came before or during the actual performance. And cyber collaboration, which is a complete remote collaboration process or geographically distributed collaboration team that embraced the audience as part of the ensemble. Siberian Chunk Certain was a cyberformance adaptation of Brecht's The Caucasian Chunk Certain on Upstage platform. It was my first experiment with online theater. Back in 2011, people asked me, is this theater? I had exactly the same issue with Helen. I had to argue in every step that yes, this is theater. Although performers and audiences are distributed, they share a common space, the cyberspace, through real-time online communication. After all, theater in its purest form is all about this direct live communication between performer and the spectator. Quoting Grotowski, theater cannot exist without the actor-spectator relationship of perpetual direct live communion. It's all is about this live communication, real-time communication. In Siberian Chunk Certain, Bruce's story is placed in Egypt of 2011. While citizens of Cairo are removing their passwords from their Wi-Fi routers so protesters can communicate with each other and the rest of the world, Bruce connects with the audience, asking them to help her find Simon, an Egyptian soldier and her fiancé, whom she lost because of the revolution. Siberian Chalk Circle can thus be seen as an adaptation in two ways. First, as it derives from the title of Brecht's play, it indicates a transition from one medium to another, an intermediate exchange that entails the use of the internet. Second, Siberian Chalk Circle offers an alternative interpretation to the original text because of the relocation of cultural, topical, and temporal settings. The genre of adaptation is problematic per se, as adaptation charts a dialectical relationship with an original text or an original form. Brecht used adaptation to criticize the past and present. In Siberian Chalk Circle, I used adaptation not to criticize the story. This was left to the audience to do that, to criticize the past, the present, and the story, but rather to get a more in-depth understanding of the play. Thus, in my work, adaptation serves as a translation of meanings in different contexts. The audience of Siberian Chalk Circle reviewed the Egyptian Revolution by making relations with their own reality. One of the audience commented, "Don't go to Greece, maybe it's worse." Relation of the Egyptian Revolution with the situation in Greece at the time. Moreover, different opinions were exposed during the performances of Siberian Chalk Circle, shaping debates on different themes. The adapted scene was thus readapted by the participants. The audience wrote the dialogues, directed the actor, and influenced the turn of the performance by commenting on its scenario. From this, one can conclude that Cyberformance opens up new open-ended possibilities for adaptation using the internet as a space for real-time adaptation and playwriting. And I'm going to show you now a short video just to give you a sense of how this performance looked. It's from the very, very first experiment I did. What you see, the text you see in front of your screen at the moment is from the second performance, and it shows a bit how audiences respond to questions that Grusha make and how they start creating debate in between them.
It's very bad for my government. I haven't food, I haven't anything. Me and my children, I will die today. Whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're an atheist, you will demand your goddamn rights, and we will have our rights, one way or the other. We will never understand you.
People on the street. Angry. Resistant. There's no continuous metaphor. But not led by the right people. The majority of the population are poor. Couldn't stand anymore. Are you hearing these too? Is there justice too? Do you intend to get out on the streets? Can you stand the blood?
So just to say what you so right now is that what Upstage really brilliantly allows you to do is while the performer chats, the computer reads what the performer types. And at the time, back in 2011, there were many different choices of voices you could choose for the computer that sounded like actually is talking. Someone thought that the performer was talking, but it was the computer reading her text. And what the gray text is the anonymous audiences responding in real time. And the main part of the performance was happening on the action chat. The rest was there to help the performance. So now I'm going to jump in 2019. When I decided to return to Cyberformance adaptations with Waiting for Brexit. Waiting for Brexit is a semi-adaptation, semi-autobiographical Cyberformance on Upstage platform for online and on-site audiences. Here, participants are invited to share their own Brexit stories and messages before and during the live performance. While breaking news, the Home Office, Bojo, Migo and Potus build their Brexit narrative with the use of avatars. Backdrops, which are background images, computer voices, and textual communication through a chat box. Here, the political became personal, with Brexit headlines and Home Office emails building a shared narrative of Brexit stories and experiences by changing one word only, Godot, into Brexit. Waiting for Brexit brings Samuel Beckett's play into a dialectic relationship with the post-Brexit situation in the UK, where each extension of the Brexit leave date can be considered as a new act, and every change of the Prime Minister as a new Godot's messenger. However, the main inspiration for this was not Beckett's play itself, but Desktop Theatre's 1997 performance, Waiting for Godot.com, which, quoting Helen, Varley, Jamieson, is the only performance of Beckett's Waiting for Godot where Godot has actually arrived. During Desktop Theatre's Waiting for Godot.com, one participant changed her avatar's name to Godot and announced that he had arrived. In the short provocation titled Online Theater, a response from Transmedia, Post-Digital and Post-Internet Future, published in Performance Research, I call for more Godots to keep on appearing and creatively challenging, disrupting, disturbing, trolling, motivating pure interactivity, immersion, and participation in online theater and performance. And I hope that more artists will also allow space to online participants to have that space for interaction and participation. in the case of waiting for Brexit, unfortunately, Godot never arrived. The only comment that was posted on the chat box by one of the on-site audiences was, "Here we are sitting in a room waiting for Brexit." That was odd. However, what I was not aware of at the time was that apart from the on-site audiences waiting in the room where the performance took place, and the online audiences waiting on Upstage platform, there were two other types of spectators waiting for Brexit. One of the on-site participants decided to wait outside the room, but the chair, Godot, never came to call him back in the room. And when the performance really started. So he was waiting outside for the performance to start for no reason. At the same time, an online participant, possibly because of last player plugin issues or firewall restrictions, waiting for Brexit stage to load without success, making him actually question whether that was the performance itself, just waiting for the stage to load. This was the first Cyberformance I performed in front of an on-site proximal audience. And I then realized how much I missed being able to hear the laughter of the audience. But as soon as I realized that, COVID came and forced me to go back into completely online communication. The pandemic found me alone in my house in Cardiff, far from my family in Greece and unable to travel and meet them. I needed an escape plan. And then Helen's email arrived about doing some work on Upstage, and here was my creative escape. I had directed Ionesco's play, Zoo de Massacre, known in English as The Killing Game, or Here Comes the Chopper, when I was studying directing in Greece. And when the pandemic started, I felt as a character from the play, a dark comedy in which the plague ravages a small town and everyone dies. As the new pandemic overwhelmed the whole globe and people rushed to isolation and internet communication, it seemed appropriate and timely to translate this work from stage to cyberstage. So I team up with Clara Gomez, Helen Varley Jamieson, Mianna Perrick, and Vicky Smith to adapt the play for the current crisis and for the Upstage platform. And I think this is the last performance that happened in the old Upstage platform. And we cannot go back now because Flash is not working anymore, Flash Player, so we cannot use the old platform, and we're really looking forward to the new platform and the new features of Upstage platform. Here are a few images from this performance. And we played with this idea of robots instead of human beings. And we used in here the text as it is from the play. We just had to cut down for the purposes of Upstage to be really short and into the point. Also, because of some bugs that wouldn't read specific words, and Helen knows more about that, we had to change some of the words for synonym words that the computer would read those words. So we had to, the adaptation in this case had also to do a lot with finding the right words for the computer voice. The pandemic also allowed me to collaborate with Papalangi Theatre in Greece. I'm in Cardiff, so it's really difficult to work with colleagues in Greece. Again, an adaptation, this time directed by Tassos Angelopoulos and Yannis Didaskalou. Ubu Material is a performative archive on Instagram. I actually place it somewhere in between Cyberformance and video art. Three actors narrators, isolated due to COVID-19's lockdown, explore Alfred Jarry's play Uberoi at home. Quoting the director, Ubu Material moves beyond the logic of live or not live streaming, a common practice during the lockdown that attempts to fit the traditional theater within the narrow confines of the screen. Here we decided to actually use new media for what they are, channels of information and communication running across the globe, connecting people, like connecting us as well, influencing decisions and raising questions. So we created a performative archive, which is published in episodes. Sometimes it broadcasts live, or it seeks interaction with the audience, but in any case, it will remain forever visible and for use in one of the largest archives of visual information in the world, which is Instagram. And I'm very pleased that this performance was selected to be part of this festival, and it will be performed live on 5th of April. But of course, we would like to invite you also to go to the Instagram account of Ubu Material and explore the archive before the live event. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. It was great, and I've learned a lot. Thanks for your very interesting talk. And I guess somebody asked the question, and may I read the question and you can give an answer. Farhan asked, hello, thanks for this panel. My question is, if the performers are in physical reality, for example, the street, and are controlled via the internet and perform for online audience, the performers first performed in the street for physical people on the street, and then online perform for online audiences. That is, they perform simultaneously for two types of audiences in two different places. Can you explain this relationship more? Is this question related to Cyberformance at all? Is Cyberformance only with online audience, or does it care about other audiences as well? In this situation, how can the real audience on the street be engaged through cyber?
Would you like me to have a go at answering that? It's quite a long question, but it's a good one. And I think it's the answer is, is this question related to Cyberformance at all? Yes, it is. How can the real audience on the street be engaged through cyber? Well, since we have mobile phones and a lot of possibilities with mobile devices, this is quite easy now. In fact, with Mobilize, Demobilize, we're talking about having parts of the performance coming from the street, where people would be using their mobile phones to send a stream to Upstage. And there are a lot of other interactive possibilities there, using social media or other messaging services and things where people can send responses or material to a performance that's happening online. And the first part of this question about performing simultaneously for two types of audiences in two different places and this relationship. So this is what I have done quite a bit of with We Have a Situation and Makeshift, as well as some other performances. And I find it really interesting, and I always feel like everything I'm doing in that context is an experiment that I'm still learning about. It's very difficult because the tendency is always to go to the people in the real space. So when I'm having network conversations, and I have some people in a room as well as some people who are online who are participating through a text chat, you have to have really good facilitation to bring those voices into the discussion. But when it works, it can be so rich because you have things that you never would have thought of yourself and responses that can be really surprising and really quite sometimes quite superficial, but in a way that takes you somewhere else, but sometimes really profound. And I think it's a whole other way of communicating that we are just starting to learn about with the internet, that we can be in such different contexts, culturally, linguistically, geographically, temporally, and yet in the same moment having a conversation. And in terms of political contexts and intercultural understanding and engagement, I think it's really a very, very rich and interesting area. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question, but you can ask another question that we can carry on from.
It seems Yanis goes to ask a question. And if not, I have a question. I have some questions. Yeah. And yeah, I'm gonna ask. Okay. Yeah, this is. Yeah, go on.
I was just going to add to what I said there. I was thinking about Christina's piece, the Siberian chalk circle, and the images that we saw there from the Arab Spring and the revolution in Egypt, where people were holding up their signs like Facebook freedom, Facebook, and these kind of things. I think also in that situation, there were a lot of people using mobile technologies on the street in political protest, which is another kind of theatre in itself. And there was, this was when we were first starting to see how these kind of platforms were going to be used in real time in these political theatre sort of situations. I don't know if people protesting on the street are going to be championing Facebook quite so much these days, but it's showing how people will grab these technologies and use them. And also in Hong Kong, there's been a lot of use of Twitter and WhatsApp and these other kind of things that allow people to communicate in real time. And, theatre and political protest are very close cousins anyway. So if people are doing it in one, they'll be doing it in the other.
Yeah, thank you. I actually, one of really great aspects of Cyberformance is related to its connection to to politics, and I really like it. The political approach of Cyberformance, and I think you both can answer my question. How can artists use the internet features like interactivity and distribution to make social changes? What Cyberformance can offer?
I'll try to respond to that question. So very personally, because my research was on political and cyberformance, and I had to question all the time what makes a performance or a cyberformance political, what methodologies I'm going to use. Is it the political theme? And what makes it political? And my actual methodology was Brecht. I used Brecht as my whole framework around doing cyberformance. And with this first performance I shared, the Siberian Chunk Circle, I actually understood what makes it political is not the political theme or the political approach, but is how audiences respond to that, and uh, giving the space, this blank space for participants completely in an anonymous way to comment, debate, say their own opinions, whether it's right or wrong, but have that discussion and that debate in between them is what, for me, made it political. And we're talking about theater, and Helen and I, when we say cyberformance, we say this is theater. Why is theater? Because it's live, and it's about live communication. So for me, this communication is really important, giving space for people to interrupt the performance, troll it, play with it, engage, not engage is what I find important. When I was reading again my book these days, because I'm writing, co-authoring a chapter, and I went back into the 1993 performances, one of the first theater online performances by the Hamnet players. And I was looking how one of their performances, someone went inside and kicked the main performer outside of the online space, and they thought there's a bug. They didn't realize what happened. It was some sort of misunderstanding, but audiences kind of like this unexpected thing. Um, and I really think that we need to allow space to people to um, become Godot and interrupt the performance. This is the live element. That's why I'm not interested in just streaming something pre-recorded that people cannot change the outcome of it. I'm not saying, of course, it's a different time. I just want to, I hope that people, because they've turned towards the internet now, and many use Zoom for their performances, to try become more inclusive for their audiences. And then we might become also more political in that way. Thank you.
Yeah,
I've got a
great.
couple of things to say in relation to that question. And kind of following on from what Christina was just saying about this idea of sort of agency and engagement for people, particularly with those two performances that I mentioned of mine, Makeshift and We Have a Situation. In both of them, the audience were also participating and even co-authoring. They were helping us do things. They were finding material. They were bringing things from their own lives into the performance. And with both of those performances, and Makeshift is now, it's nearly 10 years since we last did it. I still sometimes have conversations with people who are in the audience and say to me, you know, I still think about, or I remember this bit of that performance and how it really made me think about this or that, or I became a vegetarian after being part of that performance, or different things where I realized that because of this engagement and because of this really being part of the performance, not just a passive observer, it has had an impact on their life in some way that continues. And this is very political. This is really great. And the other thing I just wanted to say there about that as well is that Upstage is open source, and we decided that right from the beginning when we first developed it, that it should be open source. And it meant that me and Vicky and Carla and Lena, who were involved at the beginning making it, but also a lot of other artists since then, have been involved in the process of developing the software. So I personally have learned an enormous amount about open source software, and I've found the process has really it's changed the way that I make my art, and it's also given me a lot of awareness about technology and how technology shapes us if we don't shape the technology. So, you know, we go quickly to things like Facebook or Zoom or Google or whatever because it's easy and convenient. And often we don't actually really think about the compromises that we're making in order to be able to use the software that someone else has made for their own purposes. They haven't made it for us as a gift, you know, they've made it usually for commercial purposes. So I'm always in my work encouraging people to use open source tools. And these days there's open source versions of nearly everything. And also as artists to learn about the tools that we're using and to have involvement in making them, in designing them. You know, it's like if you drive a car, you should have a bit of an understanding about how it works and maybe be able to change a tire if you need to. So if you're an artist who is working all the time with digital technologies, it really helps you to have an understanding. And this is also quite a political thing as well, because it's about raising people's awareness of digital tools and the way they shape us and the way that we can turn that around. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Farhan said, thank you so much. And in countries where the government suppresses the physical presence, cyberformance is a place, cyberspace is a place where one can operate. So cyberformance is political in places like Egypt, Iran, Hong Kong, and so on. Because cyberspace, there is political and creates an alternative atmosphere. And someone on Instagram asked this question: do you think the pandemic has changed cyberformance or has taken it to a new level?
I think it will take it to a new level. I'm not sure that we've got there yet, but it's definitely brought it to much, much, much broader audiences. And what has happened also, what is happening, is that it's brought a lot more resources to it. So you see theatres that have staff and technicians and a lot of equipment and budgets and money who are coming in and doing what they can do with their resources, which is of course a whole other world from what I can do from my house with my little laptop and all of these kind of things. So yeah, I think it is taking it to a new level, and it's really changed also for audiences, that people have really they're really prepared to watch it and also to pay for it online, because previously people sort of had this feeling of like, if it's online, it should be free, or as well that they didn't really know if it was going to be any good, so they wouldn't really want to pay for it. So yeah, I think it has had that impact.
Yeah, and Christina, if you want to answer the same question.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a very interesting question. I don't know. I hope. I talked before about the short provocation I wrote for performance research, where I was actually saying that nothing had changed since the 1990s to when I wrote it, which was before the pandemic. And artists and researchers did similar things, and discussions were around similar themes like liveness. And after the pandemic, of course, it's a huge wave of theaters that have moved online. And I hope that might bring a change because more people, more heads, more ideas. But from what I've seen so far, it hasn't changed it radically. It's still this idea of experimenting, playing, and I think that's great and it's important. And I do hope that it will bring cyberformance in a different level. What however, I would like to add here is that I hope also that Cyberformance and the people using the internet so much, the theater industry using internet so much, might change theater as well. And when I was doing my research, I was looking at it as an intermediate performance genre. So in between theater and in between the internet, meeting in that space and exchanging knowledge between theater and internet. So I hope that there will be some knowledge exchange happening now. And I hope that the internet might make theater more inclusive. It might make it think about how they can keep those online audiences that they gain through this experience and don't leave them completely out when they go back into the theater. Learn, become more technical, and that's for performers, directors, everyone. Learn new tools and new ways of working, and hopefully this will inform theater when we go back into the space. And so I hope that this will be a win-win situation for both online and for theater.
Great, thank you, thank you. And I guess there is another question here by Marina. As you can see, thank you for the presentation. 2 questions. Have you noticed any shift in audience participation in your Cyberformance events during the pandemic compared to before the pandemic? Speaking of the number of people, their engagement, their reactions, the type of audience, any new audiences, etc. And another question is how do you see the future of Cyberformance in relation to mainstream theater? Yeah.
I can't actually answer that first question because, well, I was part of Jeu de Massacre, which happened during the pandemic, but I haven't made any other work because I've been busy rebuilding upstage. So I don't know how the audience has changed, but maybe Christina can say something to that first question.
I don't know either in terms of my own work, because also my work changed. I mean, the first performance was really interactive. I then moved into different ways of working. The waiting for Brexit, as I said, it was people didn't really engage in that performance. But from my experience with Papagiannouli theatre at the moment, is I feel that audiences are getting more comfortable with Cyberformance. This is the main difference I've seen. Now they get it. Now they say, okay, it's a thing. Because when I first did the Siberian Trunk Certain, people were, is that a thing? Is this theater? What am I supposed to do? Is that Brecht? I was like, okay, I have to explain on those things and try to really justify what I'm doing. While at the moment, you don't have to justify it. There are still people, especially in older people, have a lot of questions about it still. But I think younger people now get it easier than they used to before. So I think now are more comfortable. They know how to use the internet. And especially when you use platforms that are easy for them because they use it in their everyday life, like Instagram, then it's there. They can see it. They know how it works.
Yeah, great.
Actually, I think Christina's still talking. No, I was just thinking, of course, I have been audience of quite a lot of performances during this time. And I just thought, actually, while I can't say for the audience for my own performance, I can think about audiences that I've been part of. And I think everything Christina says, I agree with. And also, you know, what we were talking before about audiences in general being more open to this idea. But I think also in most of the performances I've participated in, the audience has been fairly quiet. And even if there is a chat option for them, they are a little bit hesitant still. And it comes back to what I was talking about earlier about needing to develop new codes of behavior for the audience. Like, you know, when you go into a theatre and sit down in the auditorium, you know what's expected of you. Even if there's some kind of audience participation, you kind of know how to behave and what's expected. Whereas now audiences are starting to find out, like, what is okay to do. If they type in the chat, does it interrupt or does it contribute? And this is where we as artists, you know, we need to work with the audience to help them understand these, develop these new ways of being. But definitely people are much more ready for it now.
Yeah, great. And I guess we couldn't answer the second question. How do you see the future of cyberperformance in relation to mainstream theater? And there is another question as well by Daniel James, which is, hi, can you please give a little more detail about the new features in Upstage? It's actually, I have had the same question.
Okay, before we go to Helen for the new features, just to say about the mainstream theater and cyberformance. Interestingly, the history of cyberformance and online theater, it is tied with mainstream theater. And I mentioned the Hamlet players. In one of the Hamlet players' performances, in the Macbeth, I think, or Pissybeth was the name of the performance, or it was Hamlet, I don't remember. One of the performers was one of the lead Royal Shakespeare Company performers. Also, Royal Shakespeare Company, which is a UK-based mainstream theatre, they did in 2008 Romeo and Juliet on Twitter, and with the such tweet shadow. They've also tried out Google Plus later on with their Midsummer's Night performance, and actually now they are doing a virtual reality show, which is called Dream. So they are mainstream theaters that have been experimenting and experimented with online theater. I know it sounds very experimental, but its history is interestingly connected with also mainstream theater. Hopefully we will see more now, and they will use it more and allow more experimentation.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess Helen can answer the final question.
Okay, well, a little more detail about the new features that we can look forward to in Upstage. Well, the main exciting thing is that we've got rid of the dependency on Flash, which meant that Upstage didn't work on mobile devices. But also, as of this year, it didn't work at all, basically, because Flash is no longer supported. So it now works on pretty much all devices. We haven't tested it on everything yet, but it works on phones and tablets and across all operating systems and browsers and everything. So this gives us a huge amount of flexibility that we didn't have. We had so many people that would say, oh, I tried to watch your performance, but it didn't work on my phone. And even when you tell people it doesn't, they still try. And then the other features, there are so many new features, and a lot of them are actually improvements on things that we already had. And they may not really mean very much to people that don't know anything about Upstage. But previously in Upstage, for example, you would pre-upload media such as avatars. You would create them in whatever graphics application you wanted and then upload them. And then you could put them onto the stage and move them around and make them speak. you could do a few things like rotate them sideways and things like this, and animate them with frame animation. Now you're going to be able to scale them on the stage, so you can make them bigger and smaller. You can fade them in and out. You can make them move more at whatever speed you want them to move. Previously in Upstage, there were two sort of speed states. One was kind of sliding across the stage, and the other one was moving really quickly. And now you can set it to exactly what speed you want. And these features also, like the fading, for example, they will work not only on avatars, but on any of the media that you put on the stage. So, for example, webcam streams, you can put a webcam stream onto the stage and then set the opacity so that it's like semi-transparent. And so you could layer a number of webcam images over the top of each other, or layer images under or over a live stream. So this is, it might sound fairly basic, but it gives a lot of new possibilities that we didn't have before in the platform. We've also haven't got it yet, but a new feature that's coming is called scenes. And this idea is that you can make an arrangement of media on the stage and then save it as a scene, as a preset. So if you have a performance that has a number of different sort of episodes or scenes within it, you can have at one click that all of that media will then be ready on the stage when you move to that next scene to start with. So rather than having to say, okay, now it's act 2, we've got to put this avatar and this prop and play this sound, you would just put that scene preset, and then those things would be there, and then you would start the scene. Again, this might not mean a lot if you haven't ever used Upstage, but there are also many other refinements. And yeah, Christina referred to one of the bugs that we had in the old Upstage, because for several years we were really not able to keep up with all of the maintenance that we needed to do, and we had more and more bugs kind of creeping in. So in the new platform, because it's completely new code, all of those bugs are gone, which will be a little bit sad actually, because we got quite fond of some of the bugs. But one of them was that in the chat, if you typed in a URL and you wanted people to go to a link, it didn't work as a clickable link. You had to right click it and things. So these kind of bugs will be all gone and solved in the new platform. There are lots of other things as well, but once we do launch it later in the year, we'll be having online sessions where people can come along, and it takes like less than an hour for people to get the basic operations, and that's a nice thing about Upstage as opposed to some other platforms, like for example Second Life. If you've ever tried to even watch a performance there, you have to have quite a level of knowledge to be able to go into that world and watch a performance, let alone make one. It takes a lot of time, whereas Upstage, the basic operations are very simple and quick to learn. And then once you do that, you can build on how to use things in the way that you want to be more sophisticated with quite simple tools. And you know, I'm a big fan of not overdoing the tech side to take something relatively simple. And it comes back to theatre. You know, the theatre at its most basic is an empty space and a person walks across it. So you can make something very moving and profound in a very simple way, and often that is the most effective thing. So yeah, there's
Great.
And if people want to know more about Upstage, they can go onto Upstage or the Mobilize Demobilize website and follow links to GitHub. And on GitHub, you can see the work that is like, it's a real hive of activity at the moment, and you can see some of the features and how they're developing. And join in. Everybody's welcome.